All right, Don, I think you've got an audience. So,
Okay.
yeah, it looks like most people are back.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So what I'm going to do today, since we're talking about basically drought and the tolerance of different plants to dry conditions, I'm going to go over some of the anatomical and physiological things that actually contribute to a plant's ability to tolerate or avoid drought. And so the title is kind of unique. It's called Drought Resistance, Tolerance, and Avoidance Mechanisms, because different plants do different things to get through dry conditions. Some try to avoid it, and I'll explain to you on how those things occur. And then at the end of the talk, I'm going to go through some of the ground covers and what we're doing with those and what some unique characteristics of those ground covers are. Okay, if I can do this. That's me. If you ever email me, make sure you have Master Gardener class or something in the title. Just don't leave it blank in the subject area, because I won't read it. Okay, so here I broke it down today into a couple areas. So there's the mechanisms of drought tolerance and xerophytes. And xerophytes are just plants that can grow in drier conditions. Let me turn this down. I can speak up. I can try to speak up. Can you hear me? Is that better? Can you hear me, Amir?
Yes, great. Thank you, Don.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so the mechanisms of drought tolerance and xerophytes, there's plants that are called drought avoiders, drought resistors, drought endurers. And that basically revolves around the anatomy of the plant, the ability of the plant to grow different root structures, or the ability of the plant to have different canopy types. But then we're going to get into some physiological things, and that's the drought stress response classification. You know, scientists like to classify things. And so there's the isohydric group and the anisohydric group. And I'll explain what each of those are and give you examples of that the best I can. So drought avoiders. So drought avoiders are plants that avoid drought by growing and completing their entire life cycle during the wet season. And a lot of the annual flowers that we have, and you see in the spring when we have a good winter rain, in the desert, you'll see a lot of flowering, carpet of flowers out in the desert. And those are the annuals that will take advantage of those rains. If we don't have a rainy season, they don't germinate. And you have a dry year, and those seeds will stay dormant. But these plants will complete from seedling stage to flowering and seed set within a couple of weeks. And that's when the desert really just comes into flower. So they're really nice to have out in the desert, and that's the photographs we all see with people. So that's what a drought avoider is. So then there are the drought resistors. Drought resistors are plants that avoid drought by using water sparingly. And a good example of that would be Encilia farinosa, which is a daisy we have growing out here in Riverside, or plants that store water. Good examples of that are cactus and agaves. They have large fleshy leaves, or like the saguaro cactus there over on the right, they have a lot of water storage in them, and that helps get them through droughty situations. However, if you've ever noticed, when you drive on the 10 freeway and go out through the desert to Arizona, you will not see saguaros growing on the west side of the Colorado River. And a lot of that is because they still need annual rainfall that's scattered throughout the year. That's why the Sonoran Desert is so beautiful with the saguaro cactus and other cacti, because they do need some water throughout the entire year. And in the western side of the Colorado, where we have the Mojave Desert, it usually does not rain in the summer, and these plants do not survive very well unless they're supplemental water. They can grow in artificial landscapes when water is provided. There's one in Riverside that's really pretty. Okay, drought resistors are plants that develop large, extensive root systems to acquire water. And plants like that are some palms, mesquite, and ocotillo. And if you drive down into the, if you go to Palm Canyon, you will see a lot of Washingtonia foliferas, which I can't believe I don't have a photo of this. I tried to get one, but my thought bubble did this after the COVID thing came out, and that park has been closed. But there are the Palm Canyon the Washingtonian foliferas grow along the San Andreas Fault where the water table is up, and they actually need water, and they've acquired the water through the crack in our land with the San Andreas Fault. But these plants need water continuously. And if you look on the right, you'll see ocotillo. And there's on the far right from Dave's garden, you'll see an ocotillo with the roots exposed. And then in the left, you'll see an ocotillo that's been staked up. And if you look closely, you'll see a dripper. I don't think I have a pointer. Can you see my pointer? So there's a dripper right there by that one that's staked. And the problem with this is when landscapes are installed, drippers have to be placed where the root system is. Okay, which in this case would have been right next to the plant because they're often bare root, right next to the plant. But as time goes on, the roots are starting to grow outward, and you have to have the drippers spaced out further and more drippers placed so that a root system can develop. If you don't do this, the plants fall over. They just topple, and this is what's happening in this landscape, even with such a young ocotillo. It'll happen with Palo Verde trees. If the drippers are placed right where the tree trunk is, or if there's no other water going out, then what happens is the tree roots are very close to the tree trunk, and the tree develops a large canopy because it is getting water, but not an extensive root system, and they can topple in the winds. Another way this can go bad is if you have something like a Palo Verde tree, and you water it a lot, it's in the lawn or a lawn area, what will happen is it will develop a root system, but because there's so much water, a lot of the roots will stay in proximity to the trunk, and they can topple over with that as well. So it's a balancing act with using desert trees and how they're watered in the landscape. And as you get closer to the coast, they require less water because it's more humid on the coast. And so oftentimes you'll see Palo Verde trees that sometimes topple over on the coast because they don't have an extensive root system. They don't need it. But on that other note, if I can insert this, if you go to the coast like Santa Barbara or Ventura, you'll see large ficus trees on the streets, and there's no planting area for them. But because it's so humid there, they don't need an extensive root system, and they can survive. If you try to do that out in the Inland Empire, you usually get large roots, and you have more of a problem with roots compromising on any hardscapes or sidewalks, and that's why you see differences between those. It's because of the climate change. Okay, the other one is called drought endures, and drought endures are those plants that can adapt to dehydration. And a good example of this is the Encilia on the left, or the buckwheats or ergonum, which we have in the ground cover study as well. And some ferns, resurrection ferns, will actually desiccate when there's a dry spell. And some of the tillandsias will do the same thing. So they can do that. And I don't have a photo of Encilia during the summer months, but Encilia during the summer months it will drop all its leaves. It goes dormant completely. And as a gardener, as a homeowner, you have to, one of the things with these ground cover studies is the big question to me is, I've always told people, we don't need to have garden tours of California natives in the spring when everything looks really nice to see if people will really buy into it. We need to have it at the end of the summer when things are at their worst. And when you see things with no leaves on them, or even some of the buckwheats will drop all their leaves. And so can you handle brown? Because that's the worst part of having California natives is a lot of them will be brown or almost deciduous by August or September. And that's when you really have to say, can I handle this? They all look pretty when they're flowering. So, but that's how plants can develop, adapt to dehydration, is they will actually go dormant. Now, the scientists have done two other classifications. One's isohydric. And what this is plants regulate water loss out of their leaves. And the way they do that is they, for example, with the Encilia, if it's a rainy season and they put out leaves, the leaves will be green. If you've ever noticed this on the hillsides, you'll see they're really green. But if we have a very dry winter and we don't get much rain, the plants may leaf out. They usually do, but the leaves will be white because they have a waxy and they have hairiness on the leaves, and so they appear more glaucous. And that's to regulate water loss. Same plant, different season, just because of different water availability from the rainy season. So plants can adapt that way. But one of the downsides of that is that the plants will have lower photosynthetic rates, because carbon dioxide needs to go into the leaves as well to cause photosynthesis. But because the plant is trying to conserve water by the hairiness of the leaf or waxy coating, something to protect the stomates from losing a lot of water, they won't have as much photosynthesis. So those are the isohydric plants. These are plants that physiologically regulate the water loss out of their leaves. Now, anisohydric plants are plants that allow water loss. These are plants that will grow, and they optimize their photosynthetic rates as much as they can for as long as they can. But as drought ensues and they start to desiccate, then the plant just desiccates with the drought. Now, that may sound like a negative thing, but a lot of plants that are native to areas where drought is a long-term seasonal thing, they're able to maximize the amount of photosynthetic capacity in their plant systems when they can. So they can develop extensive root systems, they can fly.
Let me just make sure Don is still there. I have also lost audio. It's not just you. Let me confirm that he's still on. We might have lost the connection. Don, can you hear me? I can see that you are still there, but
Unmute and see if that helps.
okay, yep, we're
Yes.
back. Yep.
Okay. So anyway, I don't know where I lost the audio. Where did I lose it?
About a minute ago, you
Oh,
were.
okay.
Yeah.
So this slide.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So Encele farinosa is one of those plants that will go through the spring, and by summer it drops all its leaves, goes dormant, but it optimizes photosynthesis as well, even though it can have some waxy coating or hairiness on the leaves. Buckwheat is another one that some of the buckwheat species will actually go completely brown in the summer, and some of them will stay green as they desiccate. But they optimize photosynthesis, and then it decreases as the drought continues. Okay, so I'm going to get into the ground covers now and what we're doing. There's a group of ground covers, and I've separated them out by what region they're from. And I'm going to go into each one of these. So the North American natives that we're using are the buckwheat, Eriogonum fasciculatum, and I think it's Warrior Little. And then the coyote bush on the right is Starn. That's from Mountain States Nursery. And then Onithorus wii, which is the evening primrose. These are all native to the Southwest, and they will thrive very well. They will all stay green for the most part, even during drought. The Starn is a nice form of buckwheat, is a nice form of coyote bush because it doesn't produce any seeds. In Arizona, the buckwheat, I keep saying buckwheat, the Baccharis, even though it's native. You still can't see me? Can you see? You can see me, but can't hear me again?
No, we can see you and hear you.
Okay, okay, that's an old email. Okay, but the coyote bush Starn is seedless. And out in Arizona, where they plant a lot of the coyote bush, they're having problems, even though it's native. It's becoming too too weedy in irrigated landscapes. So Starn is a nice option because it doesn't produce seeds. And Janet was also talking about, someone asked the questions about using non-natives. And that's a good point. As we get further into climate change, where we are in Riverside, we haven't had a freeze in 10 years. We have things growing that should not be growing here. And that can, in a normal climate. But it's been so warm. And now we're getting to a point, it's really hot. It's going to be 115 on Saturday. So I'm going to go out this Friday and get photographs of some streets with ash trees and stuff, because the last time we had something like this, the trees just foliated completely. It was like winter. So I want to document that if it gets that hot again. But I tend to think of natives, natives are something we put borders up around, like, California native, Arizona native. Well, plants don't have borders. They don't know where Arizona starts and California starts. So that's kind of something man has implemented. I can see from other continents, but regionally, I hesitate on that one. And so when I'm landscaping my yard, I think about things that are native to Baja, because it's a little warmer than here, but it's in this region. So as we get warmer, some of the things from Baja will actually probably perform very well here. So that's kind of how my brain goes. I think of more southern species in terms of plant tolerance and heat tolerance. So we have one South American native, and that's Lantana montevidensis. And this one's a very common one in the landscape. And in the previous studies that we've done, it's very drought tolerant. It will stay green. It develops a very good root system, and it will flower. The other nice thing about this plant is that you can prune it back fairly hard and it will come back. It may defoliate a little bit, but it recovers. And with some plants, like some of our natives, if you prune them too hard, they die. They can't recover. The Australian natives we have are one called Chenopodium spinensis or Rhagodia spinensis. This is a very nice ground cover, very silvery looking. What's nice about it is that as it crawls along the ground, it does root from the nodes. So you have a good rooting mechanism here as the plant spreads, very easy to propagate. It does not produce very many seeds, if any. It doesn't have many flowers. And so in terms of its invasiveness, it's not going to be one of those problems. If you're into bees, it really isn't a big bee magnet because there aren't any flowers. The other one is Aromophila glabra, which is another native. It has little yellow flowers on it. And I don't think this produces any seeds as well. One of the things you do have to worry about with this one is that many Australian plants don't like high phosphorus. So you can get some yellowing of the new growth if there's too much phosphorus in the soil. The Rhagodia plant does not seem to be as sensitive to this problem as the one on the right. So, but most of these plants are very drought tolerant. If they're from the southwest part of, or the middle part of Australia, where it's drier. If they're from the northern part of Australia, where it's tropical, then drought tolerance is less of an option for some of those plants. But southwest and central Australia have some really good drought tolerant plants. The Asian natives are actually the jasmine, not the lantana. This is a misprint of the slide. The other one is the honeysuckle. Now honeysuckle, it should be a honeysuckle plant there. That's the one with the nice yellow flowers, very fragrant. And honeysuckle is very nice. It too is very drought tolerant. You wouldn't think it would be with the leaves as thin as they are. You would think they would burn, but they don't. The other thing about honeysuckle is you can prune it back to the ground and it comes back. Now on the east coast of the US, it is an invasive plant. They don't recommend planting that. The jasmine on the right is a very good plant. Surprisingly, it too is drought tolerant and can take pruning. The only drawback for jasmine right now is that if you look at that photo, you see it's a little slower at filling in. But once it's filled in, it has amazing drought tolerance. It won't take zero water, but it will take lower irrigation rates. And it has very fragrant flowers in the spring. Okay, let's talk about rosemary. rosemary is native to the Mediterranean region of Europe. It's also made its way to Asia, but it's native to Europe. And just so you all know, don't get all panicky in the nurseries when you see it labeled as Salvia rosmarensis. They changed the name. They've lumped it in with the salvias now. So, and this one that we have is Roman Beauty. And this one's unique. We had salvia, we had rosemary Irene, which is a prostrate ground cover, in our other study. But this one has been introduced in the past few years. It's called Roman Beauty. And I put one in my yard. My preliminary studies are always in my garden. And what I found out with this variety is it has a serpentine growth characteristic. You really can't see that very well on the left, but it has a serpentine growth. And wherever the nodes dip down onto the soil, they root. Irene doesn't do that. So this one I feel is going to be easier in the landscape because it's going to root, so it's going to be pruned back. It can be pruned back a little heavier than the Irene or other cultivars. When you prune the other ones back too hard, they die. This one, because it roots as it serpentines along the soil, is more resistant or more tolerant to heavy pruning or tight pruning. And I have one in the front yard, and it's just done amazingly well. And I've tried very hard to kill it, keep pruning it back, and so far it's surviving. The photo on the right is the one in my yard, and I just wanted to show you the roots coming out of the nodes. So a very promising cultivar, and I hope this one gets in the trade more because I think it's much superior. It's very superior to the other varieties. Okay, we have two South African natives. We have the ice. These are both ice plants, is what everyone calls them. Delosperma cooperi John Prophet is one. It's a little slower growing, but it does get established, and they have bright flowers. There's different colors of some of these. The one on the right is fairly new. It's introduced by a gentleman in actually Chino, and it's called Ruchia lineolata Nana. And this is a much tighter form of Ruchia, and it has little flowers as well, but you can see how it's filled in. It almost looks like an octopus. And one of the things I want to point out to you all with these plants is you'll notice some ice plants grow on the coast and they are invasive, and others grow inland where it's hotter. Just because they're ice plants doesn't mean they're tolerant of heat. Some ice plants that are native to the coastal parts of Africa are not heat tolerant and will not tolerate the heat in the Inland Empire. They may tolerate drought, but high temperatures is a detriment to some of them. Ruchia lineolata Nana, I've seen this growing out in Muller's nursery in Palm Desert, so I know this thing is tough. And so it's a very interesting plant, and it's really neat to touch. It's a shame we can't have virtual touchy-feely things because it's a neat one to put your hands on and just see how weird it is. And then a closing note, I just want to point out to you that do not confuse drought tolerance with heat tolerance. They're totally two different things. And when Anish gives his talk, he is going to talk about temperature of canopies. And I want you to be aware that canopy temperature is something that we really need to start thinking about. We want to reduce the heat island effect in the urban areas. And by proper plant selection, we're going to be able to do that. And this is the first study that's being done that I know of where temperatures of canopies is actually being recorded. And it's going to be really good information for the industry to understand which plants can have a cooling effect and which plants will not have a cooling effect. But we have to be cautious because things like buckwheat, you'll see, have a higher temperature. As the water levels drop down on that treatment, the temperature of the buckwheat goes up because it's not actively transpiring. This is very much like what we as humans do. When we sweat outside, it's a cooling effect. And plants, when they transpire, it's a cooling effect. And that's one way to circumvent high heat stress. The buckwheats can tolerate higher temperatures, most of them, if they're from inland areas, but they're more drought tolerant. And some of the other plant species, they keep a lower temperature. They have either lower temperature of the canopy can be either impacted or caused by high transpiration rates, like when we sweat or an evaporative cooler would do, or the canopy color. If you have a darker colored leaf, like dark green, it's going to absorb more light and it's going to warm up more. If you have something like the Rhagodia spinensis, the Chenopodium spinensis, that silvery plant from Australia, it's going to reflect more light. So that's going to help it lower temperature because you're not going to have absorption of heat from the sun. It's going to reflect a lot of the light away, so it won't get as warm. So these are things to keep in mind. And when you come away with these talks today, you have to keep in mind that these studies are just beginning, and we're still trying to figure out whether a high temperature in the canopy it means it's drought tolerant, or whether a high temperature in the canopy means it's trying to avoid the heat, like some of these ice plants may do. So, it's interesting data. Look at it, and it's something that we have to think about. And when we collect the data, we'll kind of weed some of this information out. But it's a really neat study, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Any questions?